Hey guys, welcome to Storytime with Jester. Tonight I will be continuing the saga of Andor and his friends in my fantasy fiction novel, The Book of Prophecies. Picking up where we left off last time, Chapter 44. Miranda! The usually quiet, reserved, unemotional Jovan exclaimed as he rushed up and embraced her as would a long-lost friend upon seeing said friend after many years. Miranda just stood there, letting him express his gratitude. She knew there was no malice or wanton lust in his embrace. She knew of his love for the siren he freed on their adventure to the cursed desert. She saw how he treated her. He even created a glade in the gnarled woods with a pond for her. As Jovan regained his composure, Eric asked Miranda, "That demon, you?" "An illusion," she answered. "Damn good one," Xavier exclaimed, impressed. Andor finished healing Marikai of his wounds and joined the conversation. "They have the emeralds." "No, they don't," another familiar voice said. Looking around and seeing no one, Andor said, "Kelwyn?" Suddenly appearing out of thin air, Kelwyn responded, "At your service." When did you get here?" Andor asked, confused. "He's been here the whole time," Jovan answered. "Where he goes," Kelwyn said, nodding in Jovan's direction, "I go." "Whole time? What time?" Xavier asked, more confused than Andor. "Since we left," Jovan responded. "The ranger camp?" Xavier asked. "Turnal," Kelwyn said with a wide smile. "You've been with us the whole time?" Marikai asked, rather put off. "The towers, the lich, this accursed place, the whole time?" "Uh-huh," Kelwyn replied, again with a wide smile, proud of his stealth. "Wait," Andor said, remembering back a few moments ago. "The emeralds. You said—" "No, they don't." "Right," Kelwyn confirmed. "They don't. I do," he said, this time beaming with pride as he opened his tiny hands, revealing two of the largest emeralds any of them had ever seen. "But I saw the priest take them," Xavier said. "No," Kelwyn corrected. "You saw him take two emeralds, not these two." "Well, I'll be," marveled Andor. "That means the priests will be back," Eric said, "once they discover they have the wrong emeralds." "Then let's make haste out of this place," Xavier said, moving toward the way they came in. "No," Andor said, halting Xavier. "Not that way. That's the way the priests went." Pointing in the direction where Miranda's illusion made its entrance, he said, "That way." The passage they took seemed darker than any they had been in to this point, if that were possible. They had almost given up on finding an exit when they noticed a light up ahead. Torchlight by the looks of it. They once again doused their own light sources and proceeded with caution. When they arrived at the source of the torchlight, they found themselves in a vast cavern with torches hanging in sconces scattered around the cavern at varying heights, some only reachable by those with the ability of flight. Everyone began scanning the cavern for any signs of danger. Kelwyn's sharp eyes caught the twinkling of light shining off of coins scattered about all along the cavern floor. He relayed this information immediately to the rest of the group, and then activated the power of his ring of invisibility. "What is that?" Miranda asked, pointing towards a large mass of shadows moving in their direction. "What is what?" Andor asked, apparently not seeing what she did. Everyone else seemed to be as ocularly inept as Andor, as they all strained to see what Miranda was pointing at. Before Miranda could respond to Andor's question, a cloud of blackness suddenly appeared out of nowhere to all but Miranda, who saw that it materialized from the mass of shadows she spoke of. The cloud was quite large and quickly engulfed the entire party before anyone could react. Besides not being able to see due to the sudden darkness, everyone except Miranda and Andor felt their life being drained from their bodies at a rapid pace. The scarab of protection Andor had found in the cursed desert crumbling to dust, causing him to realize they had just been attacked by some powerful creature drawing energy from the negative material plane. When the darkness subsided and everyone could see again, They were surrounded by shadowy wisps that were forming to resemble the shapes of dragons, 7 to be exact. Xavier began to conjure a spell, but found that he couldn't remember most of his repertoire. The warriors prepared for battle against ungodly odds, but were weak and found it hard to focus on a course of action. Andor, seemingly unaffected by what maladies the others were suffering, was completely unprepared for what confronted them. His mind raced, trying to think of some spell he had prayed for that would help his party, completely unaware of what afflicted them. Had he known, there was little he could have done to save them against 7 great worms of shadow. Miranda, however, saw only one dragon. The wisps of shadow moved here and there, forming and then dispersing, and forming again the appearance of a great worm, the head of which thrust through the shadow and came to within inches of Miranda's face. "What is this I find before me?" the shadow dragon said in Akkadian. "How is it you see me when others do not?" The shadowy tongue of the worm flicked out, almost licking Miranda's face, but not. The dragon breathed in deeply, catching Miranda's scent in its nostrils. "I sense fear, but something else," he said, out loud, but more to himself, confused with this human. "You see through my illusions, which shows your power in the art of deception, but unlike your pathetic little friend," he paused to snatch Kelwyn up with a shadowy claw and hold him helpless in the air above Miranda. "You come to me as you are, no tricks, no... Wait. What is this I see?" He was using his power to see true and began to see through Miranda's illusion of herself. "You are not as you seem. You cloak yourself." Miranda's heart began to race, to beat out of her chest. Yes, she was terrified of this beast, but he was getting too close to revealing her secret to the others, and that she could not have. But what could she do? Her magic was that of the dragons, deception, lies, illusions. What is this you hold?" the dragon continued, noticing the orb she carried atop her staff. Then realizing what it was she actually possessed, the dragon's demeanor changing rapidly from one of confusion, wonderment, and inquiry to that of anger and hostility. "You hold the golden orb. How did you get that?" he said, growing angrier by the moment, his shadowy form flowing wildly and growing darker with each word he spoke. Now she was panicking. Her mind raced. Her heart was now pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples, causing her head to feel like it would explode at any minute. The pain caused her to lose focus, unable to think. The pounding, throbbing, wouldn't stop. She was close to screaming, to erupt in a blood-curdling howl that would make a banshee turn over in her grave, when a sudden calm came over her. The cause was a single word that came into her mind, a word from a voice that was not her own, but inside her head nonetheless. Where did that voice come from? She didn't have time to contemplate that right now. She reached into the folds of her cloak and grabbed the items she needed for the one spell that could work. Components in one hand, and with a sudden wave of her other, she yelled, "Begone!" A thin green ray shot forth from the hand holding the spell components and struck the center of the mass of shadows that made up the dragon. In an instant, the shadowy form of the dragon glowed a pale green and then disintegrated in 1,000 tiny wisps of shadow as fine as dust, and then was gone. Energy welled up inside Miranda that was uncontainable. All the years of torment and self-loathing seemed to culminate in this one act of destruction, as if the death of such a monster at the hands of such a weakling could erase the past in one small moment. Without realizing the source of her jubilation, much less being able to keep it from bursting forth out of her mouth, she unrestrainedly shouted with all the exuberance she had, "Fuck yeah!" Andor's Journal. Earth Day 32, 12:30. Today we very nearly lost our lives, several times. First, we encountered the priests of the Reaper. We found them in a cavern atop a mound of treasure, battling a creature that had to have been spawned from hell itself. After defeating the creature, the priests attacked us. Were it not for Miranda and her wonderful illusions, we would all be dead. As it was, the priests damaged us severely. Only 2 of them escaped. The final insult, the leader plunging Marikai's lost dagger into him, nearly killing him, and then taking it back, almost as a trophy of our second meeting. We thought at first we had failed Elsandaral and the elves of the Vressels, as the leader grabbed what looked to be the emeralds from the mound of treasure just before they retreated in the dark recesses of the Citadel's dungeons. But St. Columba be smiling on us this day. After searching the mound, we found 2 enormous emeralds. As we made our way to find an exit to this dreadful place, we came upon another cavern, and for the second time nearly lost our lives. We were attacked by a shadow dragon. All our party was weakened by its negative energy, save me and Miranda. Praise St. Columba for her, as it was again she that saved the day and won us our lives. Energy crackled as she unleashed a spell, blasting the dragon into dust. After searching the dragon's hoard, we found an evil treasure trove, which we intend on destroying, and one item of exceptional workmanship, a shirt of chainmail like none I've ever seen. We will take this to Elsandaral to see what he makes of it. Water Day 33, 12:30. We returned to the ranger camp. Elsandaral was glad to see us. We showed him the emeralds, the evil treasure trove, and the chain shirt. He informed us that we indeed found the eyes of the skull. He would take those and the evil items to destroy. The chain shirt was a relic. He bestowed it upon me. As soon as the people are healed, he has a mission for us. He confirmed what Devon told me about the powers of Ikra. He says that we are to go to the northern hills of the steppes and search for a cavern. This cavern is supposed to contain arcane items that Ikra used to gain the power of a god. Elsandaral said I will need the chain shirt and the cup and talisman on this quest. I will leave my plate armor in the safe hands of the elves. We will leave when the last person is cured of the disease. Earth Day 33, 12:30. Xavier was greatly weakened from our encounter with the Shadow Dragon. He teleported back to his tower in the hold of Marladron. There he will regain his strength and his power. He also plans on scrying on the northern hills in hopes of finding the exact location of the cavern we seek. Soul Search, Chapter 45. The waves crashed against the hull of the ship, spilling over the side and onto the deck. The storm came up suddenly, catching the crew unawares. Andor watched on as they scrambled to and fro, heeding the commands of the quartermaster. His gaze diverted from the crew to the seas. The swells were huge, causing the other 2 ships in his company to disappear from sight as if the seas swallowed them, and then suddenly reappear as if the deep didn't like the taste and spat them back out. The darkened skies lit up as a lightning bolt flashed, appearing to strike one of the other ships as if Odin himself had hurled it down from the heavens. Andor, like the rest of his companions on this ship, tried to stay on the leeward side, but the winds were angry and assaulted the ship from all sides. Then, just as quickly as the storm appeared, it ended. The sea became calm, as if they were on glass. Andor and his companions looked at each other, bewildered at what had just taken place. The lot were an odd assortment of characters, none of which Andor knew prior to their boarding the ship. Some were not the sort he would usually associate with, but for some reason they had gathered for this one common goal. The first ship flew the colors of Pelandava, and Andor could barely make out its figurehead of an armor-clad female warrior. The second ship, whose figurehead he could not make out, seemed to be flying the symbol of Ikra. If that was the case, what was it doing sailing alongside of his ship? The ship Andor was on flew the colors of Folkreach, which was at war with Ikra. Andor tried to make sense of all this when his thoughts were interrupted. Suddenly the sounds of swords being unsheathed were heard all around him. Everywhere he looked, warriors were rushing to the sides of the ship, weapons in hand as they attempted to repel boarders from the sea. Skeletons, wearing tattered, barnacle-covered clothing and armed with swords and daggers, the latter of which they carried in their bony jaws, clambered aboard by the dozens as if the sea were giving up its dead. As the warriors and wizards battled wave after wave of the undead, Andor couldn't help but look to the other 2 ships. In the light of the full moon, he could see the bones of the dead as they made their way out of the glassy sea and up the sides of the ships. It gave him an odd comfort knowing his ship was not alone in its fate. That comfort soon, however, turned to fear as he saw yet another threat from the sea. It began as a frothing of the still waters around one of the other ships. Then up thrust gigantic tentacles which latched onto the sides of the ship, crushing whatever skeletons happened to be in their way, and in one swift move cracked the hull of the ship in half and dragged it beneath the seas, taking with it the living and dead alike. On his and the other ship, the battle with the undead raged on. He called out a warning to his companions of what lurked below and the danger they were in. He then prayed to St. Columba and cast a spell that rendered him invisible to the skeletons. He cast his gaze once again upon the seas, watching the other ship and waiting for what he felt would be the inevitable. The warriors were fighting valiantly, but the undead seemed endless. It would be just a matter of time until they succumbed to the overwhelming numbers that threw themselves relentlessly at them. The seas around the other ship began bubbling, and long giant tentacles started slowly moving up the side of the hull. Andor wanted to yell out a warning to the doomed ship, but had not the ability to project his voice at such great distances. The tentacles curled around the edge of the hull, and with a sudden pull downward, the ship cracked in half and was dragged down like the first. Realizing the futility of staying aboard, Andor's companions began fleeing the ship by any means at their disposal. One of the wizards summoned a flying mount. Several of the warriors used rings of flying. Andor had no such items. He frantically searched his mind for a way out of this death trap. He reached to his neck and grabbed the string of beads that hung there. Holding them tightly, he prayed to St. Columba for help. The ship's crew was quickly overwhelmed by the onslaught of the undead. The sea around the ship began to bubble and froth. Large tentacles began slowly sliding up the ship's hull. Suddenly the heavens opened and a Pegasus appeared through the clouds, flying down to the ship where Andor was. Andor climbed atop the magnificent steed as the tentacles curled over the edge of the hull. The Pegasus took to the sky with Andor clinging to its mane as the monster cracked the ship and dragged it down to the depths. The Pegasus carried Andor to the shore of his original destination, where the rest of his companions had just arrived. As Andor slid off the magical beast, he heard in his mind the Pegasus speak. "When the time arrives, you will know what to do." Then the Pegasus took flight once again to the clouds, which parted and closed behind it. The beach was littered with bones, and the tide had a black color to it, like death. Andor and his companions took stock of their equipment and then proceeded inland. Bodies lay everywhere, the flesh rotting off the bones. The stench was nearly unbearable. The crows that would normally be feasting on this open buffet were nowhere to be seen, as if they were afraid they may fall prey to the evil that had descended on the land. There was one main road leading up from the beach and east into the town. The whole place was deserted, and an eerie silence filled the air, making every footstep seem like a warning gong. As the group got closer to the town, Andor could feel an overwhelming evil presence to the south. They came to where the road branched off in that very direction. The group bickered for a while about which way to go before deciding to continue into town. Andor, however, did not take part in the discussion. Instead, his attention was drawn south, as if something called out to his soul, beckoning him forth. As the others made their way into the town, Andor stole away into the silence unnoticed, as if he had vanished from sight and thought. As Andor continued following what malign force tugged at him, he noticed off in the distance what he knew deep in his being was his destination, the graveyard. The graveyard was surrounded by a black wrought iron fence with a huge gated entrance that the road he was on led up to. The heavy iron gates were broken at the hinges and hung loosely, giving the impression that at any moment they would break off and fall to the ground with a loud clang, breaking the deathly silence and causing those still interred to come back to life, of sorts. As he carefully made his way into the cemetery, much to his relief, the gates remained clinging to whatever they could, and nothing burst out of the ground. Even so, his heart pounded so loud that he knew at any moment the vibrations would be all the force that was needed to send the gates crashing down and thereby awakening the dead. The evil presence was strong here. He knew somehow that everything, the skeletons, the sea monster, the bodies, all the undead he and his companions were sent to destroy, was a result of the evil he felt here. He also knew it wasn't just a feeling, or force, or even an emotion, but an actual physical being. A being that, for whatever reason, lived here with the dead. A being, no, not a being, a dead god. "Show yourself!" Andor yelled in a commanding voice. He knew not where his resolve came from right now. He usually took the back seat in fighting. The meek servant awaiting the chance to use his healing or protective powers, never waging too far into battle. Was that why his talisman failed to work on the priest of the Reaper? His faith wasn't true? Wasn't pure? "I said show yourself," he commanded. "Who dares call me forth?" a booming voice uttered. Yet it did not make an audible sound that broke the veil of silence. No, it rather boomed inside Andor's own head. Blackness, like that of the shadow dragon, leapt up out of the graves and hovered like a menace in front of Andor, daring him to embrace it. It was at this time Andor knew what he had to do. With his holy symbol gripped firmly in one hand and his magical mace in the other, Andor advanced on the evil. As he swung his mace boldly into the body of the blackness, he continued to yell the same words over and over. "In the name of St. Columba, begone!" Chapter 46. "In the name of St. Columba, begone!" Andor yelled as Eric shook him out of his sleep. "Andor," Eric said, "wake up! You are amongst friends." Andor's eyes opened to see Eric hovering over him and the rest standing around him in a circle. A hard rain was falling and a dense fog surrounded them, making them seem as ghostly figures. A lightning bolt flashed, followed by a loud, earth-rattling rumble of thunder. "Where are we?" Andor asked, still coming to his senses. "The Vressels," Eric replied. "On our way to the northern hills." "At the edge of the Beastman territory?" Andor asked, confirming his recollection. "Yes," Eric replied. "Valiant and his rangers just departed a few hours ago, before you went to sleep. What was haunting your dream so?" "You chose the right word to describe my dream for sure," Andor said. "Haunting." He then told Eric, and any others that cared to listen, what he could remember of his dream. A couple of hours later, he was able to go back to sleep under the watchful eye of Eric, their camp being guarded by a ghostly guardian conjured up by Andor. As Andor drifted off to sleep, his subconscious slipped back into the dream he was awakened from. There he was again, facing the evil entity with his mace, striking it time and time again. He could feel his own life force being drained by this evil power, as its darkness surrounded him, but he never relented, pressing forth his attack with ever-increasing determination and resolve. With each swing of his mace, he shouted, "In the name of St. Columba, begone!" He felt that if he could stand long enough to prevail, that all the darkness that engulfed the land would be gone. He had to defeat this entity, had to hold on. He was getting weaker. His muscles ached. Never had he fought like this before. He felt as though he would fall at any moment. He had to hang on, keep swinging, keep... With that last strike, the darkness seemed to explode and then flutter into nothingness. Andor, weak and exhausted, on the verge of death himself, looked down at his mace. Only it wasn't his mace. He was holding a dagger fashioned from a unicorn horn. It was dripping with blood. Whose blood? The entity? It was made of darkness, not flesh and blood. Andor drifted out of the dream and into a sound sleep. The next morning, the group awoke, refreshed and ready to continue on their journey. The rain had stopped, but the dense fog was still lingering, clinging to the forest like a blanket and causing visibility to be limited to but a few feet in front of them. The lands of the Beastmen were not unlike the rest of the Vressels, except that large amounts of fairy folk dwelled here as well, helping protect the gentle creatures from the evil of Vikra's hordes, although you would not ever see them unless they wanted to be seen. Andor was quiet, thinking hard upon the dream he had, not ever hearing the fighting off in the distance. The others had already drawn weapons and prepared spells in case they were attacked or somehow drawn into battle. Marikai snapped Andor out of his thoughts by a gentle hand on his shoulder. When the party had reached the edge of the skirmishing, they were able to see the combatants. There were just under a dozen creatures that somewhat resembled men, but whose bodies were covered with dark green fur smattered with black spots or striping. It was hard to tell which, for as they moved, the black coloration changed. They were armed with stone axes and blowguns and were facing just as many, if not slightly more, creatures that resembled baboons with orc-like features. In fact, there were 4 orcs also in the battle who seemed to be leading their crossbreeds. Without hesitation and with no words to the others, Jovan sprinted to the battle, his longsword in hand. He pulled his hand axe from his belt and hurled it on the run. Its blade sank deep into the chest of one of the orcs, killing it instantly, as he drew his short sword with his liberated hand and threw himself into the fray, taking on 2 more orcs with his dual swords. In a matter of seconds, the 2 orcs fell to his blades, caught off guard by the sudden appearance of this new foe. As Jovan turned to face the last orc, one of the baboon-like creatures leapt at him from behind, teeth bared and long claws outstretched. 2 arrows whizzed past Jovan, striking the creature in the chest and propelling it several feet away with a thud as it hit the ground, dead. Hawkeye reached into his quiver and quickly retrieved another arrow. Jovan, oblivious to the action of Hawkeye, went for the last orc, as the baboon-like creatures fled, cowering into the forest as they made their retreat. The orc swung his longsword at Jovan. Jovan blocked the blade with his own longsword and thrust his short sword in the now unprotected torso of the orc. He retrieved his short sword with a yank, and the lifeless body of the orc crumpled to the ground. Jovan quickly scanned the area for more orcs, but there were none to be found. The beastmen had retreated into the forest's edge, their fur blending into the foliage. Andor made his way to the dead beastman. He felt an overwhelming compassion for the creature. He pulled out the 2 arrows and laid hands on it while praying to St. Columba. His prayers must have been heard as power flowed through Andor and into the beastman. In a moment the creature was sitting up, weak but alive. 2 beastmen slowly came out of hiding in the forest and took their revived fellow by the arms, helping him back to the others. As they disappeared once again into the trees, one of them looked back at Andor and smiled. As they continued on their quest, Miranda drew close to Marakai as they walked. "Why the sour look?" she asked him. "He always looks like that," Hawkeye, overhearing her question, chimed in as he strode past them on his way to talk to Eric. The pair slowed their pace a bit to have some privacy in their conversation, and then Miranda asked again, "What's wrong? You haven't been the same since Kirkuk." "It's nothing," he coldly replied. Seeing the empty dagger sheath on his chest, she pressed, placing a hand on it. "Is it because of your dagger?" Lightning fast, he grabbed her wrist, looked into her soul with his jet-black eyes, and said slowly but pointedly, emphasizing each word, "I said it's nothing." She jerked her hand away, recoiling as she did so. His action, while meant to only get her to quit prying, affected her deeply, bringing back painful memories of her past. Emotionally hurt, she stamped away and rejoined the others. Alone again with his thoughts, Marakai began to beat himself up over his failures in the not-too-distant past. There was the most recent event which Miranda had touched on. Yes, the 2 encounters with the priests of the Reaper had left a bad taste in his mouth, as well as a scar on his chest. But the thing that most bothered him, which ate away at his soul every day, was the loss of his castle, and the soldiers that died trying to defend it while he was away. Had his castle held against the onslaught of the Eurasians, Brandenburg would have been saved from the foreign occupation. As it was, only the peace treaty saved the southern half. The northern half, including lands previously owned by him, was claimed by Van as territory gained in the war. He vowed to avenge his men and his countrymen, even if it cost him his own life. He would return one day and drive the Eurasian scum back to whence they came. Just then there was rustling in the woods behind him. The others heard it as well, and all turned, preparing for an attack that didn't come. As they turned back around, the beastman that smiled earlier was standing in front of them, along with what appeared to be a child. The adult was carrying a large sack, the child a small one. They walked up to the group and stopped. The adult tried communicating in hand gestures in broken Elvish, which only Jovan could make out. Between Jovan interpreting and the hand-to-mouth gestures, it was clear that he was offering food as thanks for what Andor had done. The little one held the small bag close to his heart and then presented it to Andor. Inside was an assortment of colored stones which Andor took to be the child's prized rock collection. Before anyone could say a word, the two smiled and disappeared into the forest, obscured by the dense fog. Chapter 47. From the crude sketch of the Vessels and surrounding areas they had been given at the ranger camp, they could tell they were almost out of the forest. Although the fog had cleared, allowing them to now see the banks of the Desna up ahead, the river itself was still shrouded in the mist-like death, the fog clinging to its victim, refusing to release it from its icy grip. In order for them to continue on their journey, they would have to cross the Desna. According to the map, and if Jovan was as skilled as they all knew him to be, there should be a ferry crossing up ahead. As they neared the river, a light rain began to fall. They had indeed reached the ferry crossing, as a small dock was present, along with a horn that hung from the rail. Jovan took the horn and, placing it to his lips, sounded it. The resulting tone reverberated across the river in an eerily fashion, as if they were at the river Styx and was calling Charon himself. Charon, whatever. After a few minutes, from out of the fog, the shadowy figure of the ferry and its helmsman could be seen. The ferry seemed to float across the water like a wraith as it approached them. The boatman wore a dirty grayish-black robe with a hood which masked his face. His voice was crackly and hollow as he spoke, which was but 2 words as he outstretched his wrinkled husk of a hand. 12 silver. The price paid, the group boarded the skiff, and the boatman pushed off with his pole. The current at this point in the river was slow, and the skiff had little problem making its way across. About halfway to the other side, the boatman fell to his knees. The pole nearly fell in the river, but for the quick reaction of Marikai. "Are you well?" Andor asked as he slowly approached the boatman, who was doubled over at this point, coughing.
Can not continue,
the boatman responded, one syllable at a time between coughs and hacks. "Are you in need of healing?" Andor offered.
"No magic,"
the boatman spat. The river gypsies were known to be very superstitious folk, and Andor backed off at the boatman's declaration. "We paid you to ferry us across," Marikai said, angered by the boatman's malady. Throwing the coins at Marikai's feet, the boatman said,
"Continue yourself."
Visibly put off by the response, Marikai took up the pole and began to ferry them the rest of the way, grumbling to himself the whole time. An uneasy feeling swept across the entire party as the skiff made its way to the other side, as if some malign force was tugging at their souls. Eric, sensing a strange veil of evil, placed a hand on his sword. As the skiff reached the bank, the boatman was the first to depart. Unlike his actions while aboard the vessel, the boatman moved away from the river with a swiftness of motion. "Where are you going?" Marikai yelled after the boatman, still holding the pole.
"Boatman!"
Marikai screamed in anger. The boatman stopped, turned, and removed the hood of his cloak, revealing a head bathed in black fire.
"You are the boatman now,"
he declared. He then turned and walked away, cackling in laughter as he disappeared into the woods. Eric drew his sword and started to go after the thing that was their ferryman. Andor grabbed his arm, stopping him and saying, "We have a mission, and it is not that." Marikai laid the pole down on the skiff and started to join the others who had already debarked, but found for some reason he was unable to leave the skiff. Some force held him back. Noticing that Marikai was still on board, Andor said, "Marikai, what is it?"
"That thing cursed me,"
he exclaimed, realizing the meaning of the ferryman's departing words.
"I can't leave the boat,"
he exclaimed. And that, my friends, is where we are going to end for tonight. I do hope you enjoyed this tale as much as I did reading it to you. please remember to hit the like, the subscribe, and the notification bell, and make sure you share with all of your friends, and leave any comments in the comment section, and I'll get back to answer those as quickly as I can. And and I do want to say this as well. I don't have a Patreon thing set up, or any of the other little tip ways or whatever the other folks use. So if you would like to support me in posting more videos on this channel, what you could do is a one-time purchase of my novel that I've been reading, The Book of Prophecies. There are links to the hardback, paperback, and ebook versions in the About section of this channel, as well as the About section of my Facebook page, James Richmond Author. So you can go to either one of those and click on the link to the appropriate version that you wish to purchase, and it will take you directly there, and you can make that purchase. And it would greatly help me out. So, until next time, and as always, see you soon.